A very good evening to one and all present here. I am Adarsh Raj Shah and I am delighted to welcome you all on behalf of IIT Guwahati. So let's get ready for another insightful episode of Product Matters. Preparing a pitch deck is the most critical part of the job profiles of a product manager. Putting a solution clearly and concisely is very crucial. But have you ever wondered how to make an attractive pitch deck? Don't worry, ESAL has got your back. For teaching you how to make a great pitch deck, we have Mr. Vikram Goyal currently, a product manager at India's best virtual events platform. Yes, you guessed it right, the one which we are using now, AirMeet. He was also a product manager at Magic Pin. He graduated from IIT Guwahati and did his MBA from ISP. So without any further delay, let's hear from the expert himself on how to create a successful pitch deck.
Thank you, Adarsh, for that wonderful introduction. Today's session is a very special one for me because it's being organized by the EDC at IIT Guwahati. And IIT Guwahati holds a very special place in my heart because I spent the 4 best years of my life over here. And I can still vividly remember all the memories from those times. So from the wild dancing during the days of Alchiringa to the chants of Jay coming in during the times of Manthan, and from those heated debates which we used to have on the mess table to those casual conversations we had in the Khoka market. The transformation from that nervous first-yearite who was overwhelmed by the intelligence of all his peers to that confident fourth-yearite who got one of the best jobs on campus. I think that transformation was truly a fulfilling one and an enriching one. And I hope that all of you who are currently in college undertake a similar journey of transformation as you graduate and set foot in the corporate world. So without further ado, let me officially begin this presentation. The main agenda for today's session is to help you understand what are the key components that go into building a successful written case and how you can ace that. So we'll be covering a number of topics, and how it will be structured is like this. For about 30 minutes, I'll do a presentation. Then we'll have a quick Q&A for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we'll take a short break for 10 minutes where you can discuss the case with your peers on the tables. And once we are back towards the last 20-25 minutes, we'll call a few people on stage whose case submissions were good and ask them to walk us through their case. And we'll also identify what are the scope of improvement in those cases. So that will be the structure. And now I'll just share my presentation with you. Is my screen visible? Give me a thumbs up if it is. Okay, that's great. Right. So before we begin, let me start like any good PM with the goals of this workshop. So what are the goals of this workshop? The first is to give you a flavor of what actual case solving looks like. Second would be to understand the different type of cases you could get. And third would be to understand how to use the case question itself, how to go through the case question properly to make your life easier. And last would be to learn what makes for a good case submission. So in case there is some, in case there is some communication gap or I'm not audible, just feel free to interrupt me because I'm not looking at the screen, so I might not be able to read any of your chat messages. Right, so those are the goals of the workshop we are going to focus on. Let me start with what are the different types of cases you could get for the written submission. So the first type is a product design. Now, product design is the most standard case you can get. Here are some examples. You could be asked to design an Uber app for kids. You could be asked to design a music app for truck drivers. So all these are real life cases which I actually got in my interviews. So that is the most common type, which is product design. Second is product improvement. So what I mean by product improvement is you're given an existing product and you have to make it better than it currently is. It could be anything from, say, improve Swiggy to improve YouTube to improve Spotify. Now, generally, what happens is a lot of companies in the written case give you a product from their portfolio and ask you to improve it. Say it's a music streaming app, and they'll give you their app itself and ask you to improve it. So personally, I don't feel that is the right way to give a case, because as interviewers, we become biased when we have frequently used a product or we know a lot about a certain product. So ideally, I won't follow that approach if I'm an interviewer, but you see a lot of companies doing that. So you need to be prepared for that kind of questions as well. And the last would be product strategy. So product strategy can be anything under the sun. Say it could be a market entry question. For example, Flipkart could ask you, should it enter the grocery segment or not? And another question could be, how do you monetize Google Docs? Or, for example, it could be, give us what could be the additional sources of revenue for WhatsApp. So as you can see from these questions, the kind of case question could be very different. And the kind of case question you get will determine the structure or the approach that you follow. Another thing that I want to mention is, it doesn't really matter which company you're interviewing for. The kind of diversity in these cases can be a lot. So, for example, during my time, I have received questions as generic as, which is your favorite product and how would you go about improving it? So that is as generic a question as there could be. And second is, I've got a very specific question as well. So the company was building a very technical product, and it went into the exact details of, so this is the technical product we are building and how would you improve it? So the length and breadth of your knowledge has to be quite good so that you can tackle all these different kind of questions, right? So those are the type of cases you can get. Now, there are some tactics which people feel will help them in solving the case, but I strongly recommend strongly recommend against using these. So first is, you feel that you talk to current PMs working in the company and they'll help you get a shortlist in that company. Second is, you feel you'll just discuss the case with your friends and then copy their solutions. And third is, you don't pay any attention to the case, say if it was given to you 1 week before the actual deadline, and then you don't work on it for 6 days, but on the night before the case, you think you'll stay up for all night and do the case submission. So I feel all these three approaches are flawed. And if you really want to submit case studies which are a class apart and which will make you sort of stand apart from your peers, then you should definitely not follow any of these approaches. Right. So now I'll move into what are the key elements of a good case. Any good case will start with a structure. Now, what exactly does structure mean? Structure is to take any sort of problem and break it down into a number of fragments and then individually reach the final solution. So structure basically means you take a big problem, break it down into smaller parts, and then solve them individually to reach the final solution. Now, next is, if we carefully look at it, structure is there in every part of our lives. And all of us have been successful at some point of time in one endeavor or the other. And we would notice that usually it's been because we followed a very structured approach towards that. For example, while taking admission to this college or while preparing for entrance exams, you must have followed a very structured approach in order to maximize your chances. So structured thinking is not something that's unique to a product manager. I would say for anyone who wants to be successful in any endeavor, structure is very important. So that should be the primary component of your, that should be the first attitude change you would need to bring about when you're solving the written case. You would need to ensure that there is structure. And structure is considered really critical for product managers, and there are a number of reasons for it. So product managers tend to work with problems that are vague and ambiguous. So if you follow a structured approach, it gives you a framework to think. And if you don't have a framework, you'll be really confused as to how you should proceed forward. Second is, it provides you a step-by-step approach to reach the final solution rather than getting stuck in analysis or paralysis. Third is, it helps convince the other stakeholders. because when you follow a structured approach, it becomes easier to convince others who are looking at your solution. And last is it helps you execute the company vision. So before you can follow a structured approach, I would say the first thing to build a structure is to use a framework. Now, the general definition of a framework is it is a support structure or system that holds parts together. And having a framework is very useful for structuring a case study where no guidelines have been given. And I'm sure you know a lot about frameworks. For example, circles is the most common framework when it comes to solving product design questions. There is Porter's 5 forces framework, which is used for cases where you have to do some sort of competitor analysis. And like this, there are multiple frameworks that you can follow. But one caveat is there. You shouldn't just mention upfront that this is the case, that this is the framework you're going to follow, because a lot of times the interviewers feel that you're following a very bookish approach and you're not creative. So have the framework at the back of your mind, but I would say don't explicitly mention that you are using a particular framework. Now I'll just show you how could a sample framework of a PM case look like. So this is the general framework I follow, whether you are submitting a PDF or a presentation. I feel for most kind of case questions, it makes a lot of sense. So usually you start with an introduction where you give some context and explain the situation. Then you move to the goals where you mention what is it that you want to accomplish. Then is the research part where you highlight details of any research that you did. Next comes the user segments, and you could have multiple user segments. For each user segment, you'll give a description about them, you'll describe the goals, and you'll describe their behavior. Next comes the user stories and requirements. Next would be the features which you want to build. And then is the prioritization. And then if you have wireframes, you could include that. And the last two would be the success metrics. And these are usually of two types. You have the high-level business metrics, and then you have the feature-level metrics. And last would be the risks and challenges and go-to-market strategy. So this is a rough framework which I would recommend using in case the company hasn't given you any specific structure to follow. But a lot of times companies do also give you questions which you need to answer in the case. So in that case, you must also include those questions as separate sections in your framework. And so the last point which I just mentioned is smartly using the case question document, because usually if the case question is elaborate, they'll clearly highlight what are the different questions that you need to answer, and your case should ensure that it answers all those questions. So the first component of a written case is structure. Now we'll move on to the second component, which is the case should be well articulated. Now, what does articulation mean? So the textbook definition of being articulate is to communicate clearly so as to make it easier for people to understand what you're communicating. Again, it's not a skill that is unique to PMs. I would say articulation is a skill that everyone who is in a job that is client-facing or customer-facing or requires interaction with a lot of stakeholders, he needs this skill. And even if you have the most fantastic solution in mind, but you're not able to convey it clearly to the interviewer, you won't be able to impress them. So that is why articulation is very important. So I'll take an example from this workshop itself. So when I was thinking of doing this workshop, I told people that I am doing a workshop where I'll be giving tips on how to solve a written case. Now, the first question that came back to me was, what is a written case? So this clearly highlights how there was a lack of articulation in what I was telling people. So just make sure that whatever you write or whatever you say is something that will be easily understood by others, because if it's not understood, they are more likely to reject you. And articulation in a written case is much, much important as compared to a verbal interview. And why is it so? Because first, the interviewer can't ask you a clarification question. Second is he won't spend more than 5 minutes on your case. So he just skims through your case, and if your case is not written well or not articulated well, he'll find it difficult to understand and he'll just reject you and move on. So these are some of the reasons why you need to be articulate. Now I'll mention some best practices which I recommend following for ensuring that your case is well articulated. The first point here is that you should ignore paras. From a readability perspective, paragraphs are not the best way to present your information. I would say bullet points and tables are the best way to present information when you want somebody to quickly scan through it. And you might have, and in the case submissions that I got, a lot of people were using bullet points and tables, which is definitely a good sign. Second is, don't try to use fancy jargon or complex language, because if the interviewer doesn't understand it, he'll simply reject it. He's not going to spend time doing a Google search and trying to identify what exactly did you mean. Third is, proofread everything you write. There is nothing more irritating than going through a case and finding basic grammatical errors in the case that has been written. So if you usually when we are writing a case, we do it in quite a lot of hurry. So not a problem with that, but make sure that before submitting the case, you do proofread it at least once or twice. So this will ensure that there are no minor grammatical errors in your case, which is very frustrating to the user and shows lack of attention to details. And last is active voice instead of passive. So I won't go into the details of it, but it means directly saying what you want to say. So you can easily search for examples. When you use passive voice, you use a lot more words to describe the same sentence. So generally that should be avoided, and you should try using active voice as much as possible. You should try using active voice as much as possible. And last is, you should have a standard format for the case you submit. So don't try to come up with a last minute format. Say you are doing a prioritization, then the prioritization framework you use a framework which is very commonly used or which can be easily understood by the interviewer. Don't try to invent your own format, which will be difficult for the person to understand, and he might just ignore that part of your case. Right. And another important point is visual detailing. So don't cram all your information. Say if you had to submit your solution in one page, then that means you need to write less information, and it shouldn't be that you are trying to reduce the font size and you are using some weird infographics, or you're not leaving white spaces. So all those sort of ways of presenting data make it less readable and again less easy to understand for the person. So make sure that you use proper visual elements. The font size is decent. You have left sufficient amount of white space. Right. So that is the second part. First was structure. Second is well articulated. Now I'll move to the third part of written case, which is well researched. Now, what does research mean? So research, a textbook definition of research would be a systematic investigation into the study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. You all are familiar with research, and why are companies why do they love candidates who do research? Most importantly, it shows that you are serious about the role. It's not like you just read about that job description and 2 hours before the case submission, you decided to apply for this role. So if your case is well researched, it shows that you are serious about that role. And it also exposes some character traits about you. First is it shows your sincerity. Second is it shows that you are willing to go to the extra mile. And third is it shows your ability to synthesize information. So before taking any product decision or taking any major decision, usually we have to read up a lot, talk to a lot of people. So all that constitutes research. And if you can synthesize that information and present your findings in a very concise manner, then it creates a very good impression on the interviewer that you are someone who can deal with large amounts of information and extract insights out of it. So that is why that is why companies love candidates who do research. Next is, why does research benefit your case? First is it opens up space for new ideas. So when you are doing research for a case, you'll get a lot of good ideas which might not otherwise have come into your mind automatically. Next is a lot of times the kind of recommendations which we are giving are already there in the product. So if you have done your research well enough, that will help you avoid those kind of scenarios. And last is a well-researched case backs all the ideas that are presented with facts and information. And that becomes very important when you have to defend your recommendations in front of someone. Because say when you are just starting out in an organization, nobody will take your words very seriously if you just talk from your gut feeling. So it's important that you back your claims with facts and numbers as far as possible. It's not always possible, but as far as possible, try to do this. So what is the kind of research you can do? First kind of research is the qualitative research. Say you get a case study for a particular product. Then you should study the product thoroughly, see what all is possible in that. Next would be you should scan the competitors' products and see how exactly are they performing, what is the difference in the features compared to the main product. So this will give you a good sense of what is there in the product you want to focus on and what is not there or what could potentially be there. The second kind of research is the more common usage of the research which you'll be familiar with. So this is collecting data points and graphs to show, say, market size or technology trends. So these are the two kinds of research that you generally do before submitting a case. And one thing I want to mention here is, while research is good, don't spend too much time on doing research. So you don't try to go through every report that you find online and read through it, or don't try to include useless data points just because you feel that would give a lot of weightage to the case study. So focus on research that's useful and that has a direct impact on the kind of recommendations you are making in the case. So that is the third point. First was structure, second was articulation, and third is well-researched. The last element of a kick-ass written case is originality. What do I mean by originality? So originality means the ability to think independently and creatively. So I'll give a personal example here. So a few years back, there was this case study that I was solving, which was related to an Insta Messenger app. So the app is similar to WhatsApp, where you can message others and talk to them. One of the recommendations that I had given here was that there should be a way for people to get reminded of their messages, and that is a function, and that is a feature which was not present there in WhatsApp at that time. And when I told the interviewer and quoted personal examples, how I used to tell someone that I'll talk to you in the night, and then I used to forget it simply because there was no way in the app for me to remind. So the interviewer's reaction was very good because I had directly quoted a personal example and told him about a situation that had occurred with me. So the best possible way for you to bring in originality is to quote personal examples, because when you bring in personal examples, it really helps. It helps create a lot of impact on the interviewer. It shows that you have a lot of original thinking. Now, why is originality important? So, as I mentioned, it helps you give some output which is not common or which might not be there in other case studies that people are doing. So that is the most important, I would say, reason why you should try to develop originality, because this is the single most important thing that can help set apart your case from others. Because say if someone has done the structuring properly or someone has done their research properly, then mostly the suggestions are somewhat similar. But the more originality you bring to your case, the more differentiated your case study is going to be. Now we come to the logical question: how do you develop originality? So there are a number of ways to do this. First is you should start using products thoughtfully. What do I mean by using products thoughtfully? So for example, any product that you use, say you use WhatsApp, you must be using some to-do apps, you must be using e-commerce sites, you use a lot of social media sites. Whenever you use a product, try to carefully observe the different workflows that are there. Say, For example, when you opened up an app for the first time, how did it onboard you? So that really tells how thoughtfully that product has been designed. Another way to do this is to see how a product nudges you to take some actions. For example, if you are on a website, say if there's an app that wants you to post more on that app, so it will give you subtle nudges that will motivate you to post on that app. So this is another way how you notice and observe how this app tries to make me do certain actions, and that is how you internalize all these good things, because the more you start using products thoughtfully, the more originality you'll develop. Second way to develop originality is to discuss and debate ideas. So whenever you're talking with your peers, or whenever, say, you're talking with someone senior or someone junior, always try to discuss and debate ideas rather than taking them at a face value. For example, people talk about blockchain. So whenever you're talking about blockchain, try to identify its pros and cons. Why does it work for a certain industry? Why does it not work? So when you engage in that kind of discussion, you tend to develop your own thought process, because you read a lot of content online, but reading that is not enough to develop an independent thought process. When you engage with any concept that's given you, that is the time you actually start developing ideas. Third way to develop originality is to interlink concepts. What do I mean by interlinking concepts? So I just mentioned the example of blockchain. So blockchain is the underlying technology, and cryptocurrencies are one possible implementation of it. But blockchain's use case is not restricted to cryptocurrencies. It can benefit a host of other industries as well. So that is how you interlink concepts. So similarly, machine learning is there, artificial intelligence is there. You see machine learning being used very vigorously on all the e-commerce websites you use. For example, when they recommend you products, or when you're browsing social media, the post that comes on your feed, all of them are examples of machine learning. But can you think of applications of machine learning which are outside of the industries which you observe on a day-to-day basis? So this is called interlinking of concepts. The more you are able to link concepts from one domain to another, the more originality comes into your ideas, because this is something that does not come naturally to a lot of people. So if you can start interlinking concepts, then you really develop an edge over your peers. And last is, so this is a bit philosophical. You should always understand and accept where you are currently. A lot of us remain in denial mode. For example, if you're not doing well in a certain topic or in a certain domain, we try to avoid that, or we try to skip that, or say if we are not good in a particular skill, we always try to avoid doing that. So that is the difference between someone who is able to bring a lot more originality in the case, because he identifies his shortcomings. So for example, say you are not from a technological background and it's hard for you to understand technology very easily, then you should accept that and put that extra effort to learn technology and the technological concepts. Because if you don't do that, what will happen is you'll start throwing around tech concepts like buzzwords, and the interviewer will very easily be able to see through whatever you have said. So if you don't want to get into that situation, always accept where you are currently and make conscious efforts to improve from that. Right. And last point is similar to the previous slide. Your case has to be original, but don't waste too much time in sort of coming up with a lot of original ideas. You will always have time constraints in which you have to submit the case. So make sure that you don't violate those time constraints. And also remember that originality is not something that will come in 2 days to you. So it's a long process. Say if you want to start appearing for interviews 6 months later. So now is the time you actually start working on developing your originality. So this is the fourth point. Right. So I'll reiterate again the four important aspects of any written case. First is having a well-defined structure. And I have given you a rough structure, but that does not mean that you follow that structure. Always ensure that it is in line with what the company is expecting from that particular case study. Second is it should be well articulated. Third is well researched. And last is it should demonstrate originality of thought. And if you're able to incorporate all these 4 points in your case, I think your case is definitely going to be a class apart from everyone else. Right. So what usually happens is that the amount of time we have to work on our cases is very less in comparison to the total time we would ideally want to spend. So here are some minor optimization techniques which can help you do more in less time. So first is I call the first concept as slow and steady. What slow and steady means is usually you get 7 to 10 days to solve a case. So you should fully utilize those 7 to 10 days. When you get the case, maybe you give it a read and then let the problem sink into your head. Because I've noticed this, whenever there's a challenging problem that's stuck in your head, you tend to get solutions at the most unexpected times when you are, say, taking a shower or you're going for a walk. So that is the time good solutions come to you. So it's important that whenever you get a case, go through it at that moment itself and slowly and steadily build up your case, read up about it, rather than, say, focus on doing everything just one day before the actual case submission. So that is why I say that you should be slow and steady when it comes to submitting your case. And second, it also prevents obvious oversights, because if you try to do everything one day before the submission, you miss some very important points. Second is you should use reusable templates. Now, what does reusable templates mean? So for example, this presentation you see, so this has been made according to a specific template. It has a title. It uses a particular layout where there's a title and all the points are written in a bullet point format. How this helps me is whenever I have to give a different presentation, I don't have to spend a lot of time on designing this or thinking what should be the font size, where should I place the images. Because if you have to spend time doing all that stuff, then the actual case which you have to work on, you forget about that. So it's important that the first case you do, make a template out of it. And for all the future cases, try to use the same template. You might need to change section headings or stuff like that, but it will mostly be same. The benefit of this is you'll be able to focus on content rather than the look and feel of what you are submitting. And that is most important. Third is review is very, very important. Earlier also, I mentioned that it's important to get to review your case, but what's even better is to get it reviewed from someone who has not given much thought on this case. So it could be your friend from some other college, or say someone from your family, your sister or brother. What this helps you in is it helps you ensure that you're not writing anything which is not obvious to a layman. Because if something is not intuitive to the reviewer, it won't be intuitive to the interviewer as well. So this becomes a very important thing. A key point to note here is don't get your case reviewed from somebody else who's submitting the case. So there's a clear conflict of interest. If your friend is also submitting the case for the same interview, then there's a clear conflict of interest, and ideally you shouldn't be reviewing each other's submission. Try to get it reviewed from someone who has no conflict of interest in submitting that case. And last would be, so this is a common problem which a lot of aspirants faces. They always try to imagine that, oh, if they spend one more hour on this case, it's going to come out better, or some new ideas are going to strike them. And as a result, what happens is you keep on delaying the submission until you are just, say, 5 minutes before the deadline. In general, that is not a good practice. There comes a point when you'll know that, okay, this is the best I could do, and that is the time you should hit the submit button. So you shouldn't wait for more time than that. So that would be my final advice, that don't wait till the last moment to submit your case. When you realize that it's good enough, just go ahead and submit your case. So those were the 4 optimization techniques which I would advise you to follow. First is slow and steady. So start the case early on rather than at the last moment. Second is reusable templates. So try to focus on the content rather than the presentation. Third is get it reviewed from a third person. And last is submit when you feel it's good enough. Right. So this is the last slide. What are the common challenges that people face while they are submitting cases? First is, this is the most common challenge which people face. The question is vague. The problem might be too technical, or it could be a product which you have never heard of. So usually those are the reasons why the question is vague. My recommendation here would be to break down the problem statement. So you identify what is the product that is being talked about. Is there any additional information that is being given? Is there any data point that's given? Are there any specific questions? So try to break down the problem statement as much as possible, because if you read your question carefully, you get a lot of insights from that itself. So that would be point one. Second is you need to identify what exactly is vague. So it can't be that the entire case is vague and you don't know how to proceed at all. There will be some elements which you're able to understand, and there will be some elements which you're not sure about. So as a good PM, your job is to identify what are the parts here which are vague. Is it the goal which is vague? Is it the user segment which is vague? Or is it the product which is vague? And once you have identified what is vague, clearly make assumptions and then proceed. Because that is part and parcel of working as a PM. You need to make a lot of assumptions in your job. So you shouldn't be afraid of making assumptions. The only point is you should be able to justify whatever assumptions you're making. Second is you are absolutely clueless about the topic. So you don't know what exactly is the product, how does it work. Again, no need to be scared of this. First option is Google the topic, try to read up a bit about it and get a basic understanding of how it works. The second option I used a lot when I had case competitions in my college and I had to submit cases. I used to call up friends who were working in that industry and get their viewpoints on how exactly that thing worked. So for example, there were a lot of companies which were building developer focused products, and I had been out of touch with coding for the past few years. So when I got cases from these companies, I just called up my friends who were still developers and I tried to understand what exactly that product or topic is all about. So this gives you a good enough idea to start brainstorming or start researching. That would be the second part. Second is a lot of people, so most of you here are engineers, so you probably won't face this problem. But say you're not from an engineering background, then one common challenge that you face is you're not very comfortable with numbers, because playing with numbers is not something which we are exposed to in the initial stages of our career. So if you feel that, say, revenue estimations or market sizing is very difficult for you, first thing is to understand that you're not alone. A lot of other students are facing the same problem. So it's not like this is a problem that is unique to you. Second is try to keep it simple. So don't even the people who are experienced, who have been in the industry for a long time, even they are very clueless at times about things like market sizing or estimating revenues. So don't think that the interviewer is someone who's an expert in this. So just follow simple first principles and work from that. And last would be to follow a framework for estimating the revenue or market sizing. You have very straightforward frameworks online. So just follow them and use those to put up any guesstimates that you want. So these are the three main challenges which I feel that people face when it comes to solving cases. First is question is vague. Second is you don't have any clue about the topic. And last is you're not very good with numbers and estimation. So for each of these, there are specific ways in which you can tackle this. And hopefully, if you follow these strategies, you should be able to do a good enough job at it. Right. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Before we take a break, I would like to open the floor for questions so that we can make it more interactive.
So lots of questions are there, sir. So first, a question from AP. How do you overcome biases for your solutions?
Can we call AP on stage? Okay, so while AP comes on stage, I'll take another question, which is from Sai. That how much product case study matters for applying for product jobs and internship interview? So it depends on the company. These days, you'll notice that a lot of companies tend to ask written cases because it helps separate out the serious candidates from the non-serious candidates. So I would say if a company doesn't ask you a written case, then obviously it doesn't have much importance. But if a company has asked you a written case, then in colleges, what I observed was during college interview rounds, companies mostly used to look at it as a filter. So it was just a filtering criteria. But when you are applying for interviews laterally, then I think case study becomes one of the most crucial aspects, which will decide whether you make through the interview or not. Because during your interviews as well, you will be grilled a lot on the cases. So I've noticed very distinct behaviors in the companies. In the campus placements, the written case just acts as a filter, but in lateral interviews, case study plays a very crucial role, and it might be the basis for the company deciding whether to hire you or not. Right? Do we have AP on stage?
No, actually, he didn't accept the invitation I sent him.
Okay, no problem. So I just tackled Sai's question. Maybe we can take the next question from Abdul and invite him on stage.
Okay, sure. I have sent the invitation.
Can we show Abdul's question on stage?
Yeah, sure. He is
Abdul.
also on.
Abdul, can you hear us? Hello. I think there's an audio problem. Okay, I'll try to answer the question from what I'm able to understand. So the question is, while providing recommendations, how deep should these be? Okay. I would say if it's a case study that's targeted towards product management, you don't really need to give a plan for marketing. That just becomes a bonus point. So if you have time, give a plan for marketing. Otherwise, don't. If the company really wants you to give a marketing plan, they'll explicitly mention in the case study that we also need a go-to-market strategy or a marketing plan. In that case, you need to give it. But otherwise, I would say it's not mandatory. For certain kind of case questions, say a company wants to enter into a particular category, or a company wants to build a new product. Say Amazon wants to launch Prime in India or wants to launch Kindle in India. If there are these questions of these kind, then I would definitely say it makes sense to give some recommendations around how you should approach your marketing as well, because that shows that you have thought through the problem well, and you are not just focused on building it, but you are focused on getting that solution adopted as well. Okay, let's move to the next question. Can we take Shyam's question? Okay. How to choose relevant framework in the interview? Right. So you're spot on that. The time will be limited. So the frameworks that I've discussed here are primarily meant for written case interviews, where you have a lot more time. You'll have at least 5 to 7 days, or at the minimum at least 3 days before you submit the case. So generally, there you can follow a structured approach. When it comes to the verbal interviews, then I agree that having a framework, like thinking of a framework on the spot, becomes difficult. So generally, what I feel is for most of the questions in product interviews, the circles framework works quite well. So whether it's a product design or a product improvement question, you can follow the circles framework, and that mostly solves all the problems. So circles is simply, first you start with circles is comprehend the situation. So first you give the context, then second is you identify the customer segments. Third is then you try to list down the what are the user needs. Then would be you prioritize what are the needs you want to focus on. Then you list the solutions. The E part is you evaluate the trade-offs, and last is you summarize whatever solution I've given. So if I were to recommend, then circles framework is that one single framework which you can use for all your product design or product improvement interviews. But for the written cases, you'll have a lot more leeway since you have a lot of time, and there you can probably use something that's more standard. Okay, next question from Shobna. Right. So you are right on that. The different types of cases can't really fit into one template. That is why it's important to keep in mind that every case will have some basics. So you should always focus on the basic or the key elements of the case. So as I mentioned, the most important part of a well-written case is the structure. So try to identify what is the structure that will best fit in this particular scenario. So there is a template that I gave you that usually works. If that doesn't work, see what are the questions that the company wants you to answer. Use those as the sections for your case and add a few more sections based on what you feel would be the most relevant. So that would be the way I would approach using structure for solving the case. And I won't really call these templates because you, at the end of the day, what you are doing is you're trying to answer all the questions that were asked during the asked in the written case. So that should be our focus. If you're convinced that you're answering all the questions that were asked in the interview, then I think your template is good enough. You shouldn't worry about having the perfect template or the perfect structure. Ultimately, the goal of any template or any structure is to answer all the questions which the interviewer wants you to answer. So just focus on that aspect and the structure or the template will come naturally. Even if you don't know any template, just focus on answering all the questions which the interviewer expects you to do. That would be good enough. Right. So this is a very good question. And generally the understanding is that products which copy their competitions don't survive for long, but products which focus on the needs for their users, they do very well in the market. So competition is just to give you space to learn about more new ideas, what could be there. Competition should never be a basis for including a particular feature in the product. The basis should be you go through the product that is there, you identify the user segments, you identify what are the user needs. So for anything you're building, you'll have 4 or 5 major user needs that you want to address. And any solution that you build has to address one of those user needs. It might be that one of those user needs is addressed by a competition really well. In that case, you can take up that competitor's feature and pose it as a solution to that need. So that is how you cross-pollinate ideas from your competition to your own product. So when you are copying a solution to a user need. You're not copying the feature itself. So that is why it's important that when you get a problem, you focus on identifying what are the user needs, and from that user need, you try and search for what is the best possible solution. So that is the way you should approach competitors. Not that you're just looking at the competitor's app and okay, you are doing an apples to oranges comparison, because they could be focusing on different segments or different use cases. That is why always focus on the user needs, and from that build upon your solution. Okay, so this is an interesting question. It just goes on to show how fast the field of product management has grown. I graduated from IIT Guwahati in 2013, and there was not a single role for associate product manager at that time. So at our time, we didn't even really know what product management actually is. So that is something which probably as an engineer, I had no idea about that, how exactly, what exactly does product management mean. And my initial understanding of product management or my interest came about around 2017. So that was the time when I had, I was sort of done with software engineering, and I was looking into explore some different fields which were more suited to my taste. And that is how I came across this field of product management. And there I realized that there were a lot of aspects in a product manager's job which I really enjoyed. So one was there was the communication aspect of it. So you have to be really good in verbal and written communication, and I like both those things a lot. So that was the initial trigger for wanting to go into product management. And there's a lot of hustle involved in this role. And since my college days, I've liked a lot of doing a lot of things where there's a lot of hustle involved. So that is why that was the second motivation for me to take up product management. And last was, even though I didn't want to be an engineer, but I wanted to stay close to technology, and product manager is the uh, best way to do that. Even though you're not directly building the product, but you're using technology to solve some problem. So those were the three motivations that were there that sort of eventually got me into product. And I would have the same suggestion for you as well. Don't choose product management because the salaries are high or because it is the hottest field in the market. See what are the skill sets that are required, or what is the day-to-day life of a product manager like. If that is something which interests you or excites you, only then go for product management. Otherwise, don't go for product management. So I have a friend who started out as a product manager, but he felt that this job was not really meant for him. He had to just keep on running after people, and he didn't enjoy that a lot. So he moved back from product management to engineering. So now he's an engineering manager. So always make sure that the reason for your choosing product management goes deeper than the number of jobs for it or the salaries offered. Because otherwise, what will happen is you'll hate your job and you won't be able to grow as much in this job. Okay, so we already took this question. Yes, this will be shared.
Yeah,
Are
that's
we
it
done
from
with
the.
the questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to take a break, or should we directly move to the case submission? Maybe we can pause for 5 minutes. People can take a break, and then we can discuss the WhatsApp case study.
Okay. No problem.
ठीक है. So